People often say Islam oppresses women, and when they point to evidence, one word keeps coming up: hijab. But before we argue, we need to be precise. Hijab, niqab, and burqa are often treated as the same thing, but Islam doesn't treat them that way. So in this session, let's ask some tough questions directly to ChatGPT. Let's start off with, what does Islam actually require when it comes to women's dress? And how is that different from hijab, niqab, and burqa as practiced today?
Islam makes a distinction between principle and practice. At the level of principle, the Qur'an requires modesty for both men and women. For women, this includes covering the body in a way that is modest and dignified. The Qur'an does not mandate a specific garment, color, or cultural style. Hijab refers to modest dress and behavior. Niqab, face covering, and burqa, full body covering, are cultural practices that developed in certain regions. They are not universally required by Islam. What Islam sets are boundaries. How societies choose to express those boundaries is where culture enters. Confusion arises when cultural expressions are treated as religious law.
Okay, let's keep the cultural aspect aside, as it will derail our conversation. Can you specifically tell me what Quran asks women to do?
The Qur'an gives limited and specific guidance on this. In chapter 24, verse 31, women are instructed to guard their modesty, not display their beauty openly, and to draw their covering over the chest. Just before that, in chapter 24, verse 30, men are commanded first to lower their gaze and guard their modesty. Another verse, chapter 33, verse 59, instructs believing women to dress in a way that is recognizable and dignified, so they are not harassed. Beyond these verses, the Qur'an does not prescribe a specific garment, require face covering, or define color or style. It sets principles of modesty, not a detailed dress code.
So if a principle is given, then there must be some rational backings following that which translates these verses to hijab, niqab, and burqa. What are those?
Yes, the reasoning works like this. First, the Qur'an sets principles: modesty, dignity, and reduced sexual attention. Second, scholars translate principles into practical safeguards. If modesty is the goal, clothing must cover what a society generally considers sexually attention-drawing, be loose enough not to emphasize the body, and signal restraint in public space. That reasoning leads many scholars to hijab as a minimum expression of the principle. Niqab and burqa come from extending the same logic further, arguing that if covering reduces attention, more covering reduces it further. That step is interpretive, not explicit in the Qur'an, which is why scholars disagree on it.
Okay, then let's take the basic agreed-upon interpretation of hijab. Why women have to be explicitly told about this dressing principle, and why no dressing code for men?
Men are not exempt from dress guidance, but the Qur'an addresses exposure differently because social reality is different. Men are commanded to lower their gaze first because visual desire is the primary trigger the Qur'an identifies. Women are then given guidance on dress because women's bodies across societies are more likely to attract sexual attention in public space. So the distinction isn't about value, it's about impact. Men do have dress limits in Islamic law, covering between navel and knees, avoiding revealing or tight clothing, but they are less detailed because men's bodies are not sexualized in the same way. The Qur'an isn't claiming men are morally superior. It's responding to how desire actually operates in society.
This looks like a very good deal from a man's perspective. All they have to do is to promise restraint while women have to change their appearance. If men are the primary source of the problem, why is the visible burden placed on women?
That criticism assumes accountability ends in this life. In Islam, it doesn't. Islam places heavy emphasis on accountability after death, where private actions carry weight even if no one sees them. What you are calling men's promise of restraint is not an empty promise without accountability. It assumes ultimate judgment happens outside human courts on the day of judgment. Hijab isn't meant to compensate for male behavior. It's a parallel obligation within a system. So the framework isn't women adjust because men fail. It's both act now and both are accountable later. If you remove the idea of life after death, the system will look unbalanced.
I will have to push a little more here. It could have just asked both genders to lower their gaze. Why specifically getting females to submit further?
Because lowering the gaze addresses desire, not exposure. The Quran treats them as related but different problems. Lowering the gaze regulates how people look. Modest dress regulates what is presented in shared public space. Islam doesn't see this as women submitting further, but as addressing both sides of the interaction rather than only one. You may still disagree with that design, but within its own logic, it isn't about hierarchy. It's about risk management.
And what is wrong with having this exposure? In today's modern Western world, both men and women are free to wear and look what they like. If anything, these societies are safer and more progressive than any of the Muslim countries.
Islam doesn't say exposure is inherently immoral. It treats it as a trade-off. Western societies prioritize expression even if it increases sexualization. Islam prioritizes reducing sexual pressure in public life even if that limits expression. Whether a society is safer or more progressive depends on what you measure. Legal equality and freedom are strengths of the West, but high levels of objectification, harassment, and appearance-driven anxiety also exist, and it's important to separate Islam from Muslim-majority countries. Many do not apply Islamic principles consistently or justly.
You said Islam doesn't say exposure is inherently immoral. I'm not sure if I fully agree with you on this. Islam and Quran claim to be a code of life. If it is just a trade-off or nice-to-have thing to think about, then the claim that this is the way of life doesn't stand. It's taught as this is the ultimate truth.
You're right. Islam does present itself as a way of life, not a lifestyle suggestion. When I say exposure isn't inherently immoral, I don't mean it's morally neutral in Islam. I mean Islam doesn't treat the body itself as evil. Islam's moral claim is this: unrestricted sexual display in public space is harmful to human dignity and social balance, and therefore should be regulated. So it's not a casual trade-off or a nice-to-have. It's a moral judgment about how humans function, psychologically, socially, and spiritually.
So going back to my question again then, if what Islam prescribes to be the best recipe for society, then there should be clear, visible harms on societies not following them. But I don't see any of those issues. Yes, there are challenges and trade-offs that you mentioned above, but that's true to any choice you ever make. There will always be pros and cons.
That argument assumes moral truth must show up as immediate, obvious harm. Islam doesn't frame its guidance around short-term social breakdown. It frames it around long-term effects on behavior, dignity, and meaning, things that degrade gradually, not catastrophically. Many societies function while absorbing costs silently: normalized objectification, rising anxiety around appearance, sexual pressure at younger ages, and blurred boundaries in public space. These don't look like collapse. They look like normal life. Islam's claim isn't that societies without these limits can't function. It's that they function while paying a price that isn't always measured or noticed. So yes, every system has trade-offs. Islam's position is that some trade-offs are too costly even if they feel manageable. You may still judge those costs acceptable. Islam doesn't deny that choice exists. It claims unapologetically that it chooses differently.
So how long will I have to wait to see the costs and harms you are suggesting showing up in a society to confirm that Islam's way is correct?
Islam isn't making a short-term prediction. It's making a claim about human nature. The costs it points to don't appear as sudden crises. Here is an example. A few decades ago, it was normal for children to play outside unsupervised. Today, constant surveillance is normal. Society didn't collapse, it adapted. But the cost is that children now grow up assuming privacy is optional, and adults assume constant visibility is safety. Nothing bad visibly happened. Life went on. But something was traded away. Now apply that logic to sexual exposure. When revealing dress becomes normalized, it doesn't just express freedom, it slowly reshapes what is expected to be seen, to be attractive, to be competitive. Over time, modesty stops being neutral and becomes a disadvantage. Opting out requires explanation. Attention becomes a currency, not a choice. They accumulate slowly, and get absorbed into what feels normal. So the question isn't when collapse happens, but whether a society notices what it's trading away before it forgets there was an alternative.
So maybe this isn't really a debate about hijab at all. It's a debate about how societies manage desire, freedom, and responsibility, about whether limits protect dignity or suppress it, and about whether harm has to be obvious before it matters. You don't have to agree with Islam's answers, but you do have to admit it's asking a different question. Not, what are we free to do, but what kind of people are we becoming? And that's a question worth sitting with. Thank you for joining us. We will come back with a different question next time.